Good morning. Concordia University is located on unceded indigenous lands. The Gyunge Hage Nation is recognized as the custodian of these lands and waters on which we gather today. Jojage, Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many nations. Today, it is home to a diverse population of indigenous and other peoples. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in our ongoing relationships with indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Thank you. Brigitte.
Thank you very much. And a very warm welcome to this book presentation and the presentation of an exhibition. And I'm very grateful to the organizers of the conference, and Marguerite Mendell is the main organizer, of course, for giving us the opportunity to discuss the book and the exhibition in the frame of this wonderful conference. My name is Brigitte Aulenbacher. I'm a professor of sociology from the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, Austria, and the vice president of the International Karl Polanyi Society. It's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists of this book presentation, and I will start with Andreas Novy, who is a professor of socioeconomics at the Vienna University of Economics and president of the International Karl Polanyi Society. And he has co-authored the book as well as the exhibition. And Maria Markantonatou from the University of the Aegean in Greece, and also member of the board of the International Karl Polanyi Society, and she is the co-author of the exhibition. Then Marguerite Mendell, everybody knows her, of course, from the Concordia University and the director of the Karl Polanyi Institute of Political Economy. And she has written the foreword to the book. And Claus Thomasberger from the University of Applied Sciences, HTW, in Germany, and also board member of the International Karl Polanyi Society. And he has co-authored the book and the exhibition. And we are very happy to present this book and this exhibition because there is something very special on it. It's a kind of a very special reference to the works and life of Karl Polanyi. We all know that Karl Polanyi has been a most renowned scientist, but also has worked as journalist and also as in education. So, and this book and this exhibition strive to reach an academic and non-academic audience. And the editors of the book are scientists, Andreas, me, and the famous and amazing Karl Polanyi as the editors of the book from Science, but also Markus Materbauer, who is a representative of the Chamber of Labor, and Armin Thurnherr, who is a journalist and editor of one of the most renowned weeklies in Austria. And this weekly, Falter, offered us to write first this book as a special issue of the weekly. So it has been disseminated with 150,000 copies as a weekly. And then the Falter has been supportive to produce and to publish the book in German. And I'm really grateful to the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung in Germany, and especially to its representative, Michael Brie. They gave us the funding to publish this book in English. So it's a book that address a lot of communities and strives to refer to Karl Polanyi's works and lives and to read it for today. and I will show you the next slide. This is the exhibition. It only exists in German at the moment, but perhaps those who are familiar with German may be interested in it. It's an exhibition of 16 roll-ups, and it's a presentation on the works and lives of Karl Polanyi, his family, his times, and the main concepts of his work. And it's possible, this is just a short impression of the exhibition. And if you go to the homepage of the International Karl Polanyi Society, you can get a free download of the book here, and you can book the exhibition here also. It's for free. So I hope it may be of interest for some of you, and I would like to start now our conversation on the book and the presentations and the exhibition. So first of all, we plan to have a conversation in our round, but it's also possible to put questions or comments. You see the question and answer on the screen, and you can put question and comments, and we will include them. So my first question goes to Margie. The book mentions Karl Polanyi as an epochal thinker. You are a long-standing protagonist of his work and well-informed participant and observer of the international debate around it. If you are thinking about the decade of economic liberalization since the 1970s of the last century, when has the work been rediscovered and why?
How to be brief, because there's a lot to say. Let me just go back for a moment to the 1970s and the early 80s, because remember, the Institute was created in 1988, and our first conference was in 1986 in Budapest. And that was extremely interesting and pertinent to your question, because I was privileged to co-organize that with Kari Polanyi-Levitt and the Hungarian Academy of Sciences at the time. And we were very interested to see who they were going to invite. And we had a list of who we would invite. Our list, of course, consisted at the time of Polanyi scholars in economic history, economic anthropology, international political economy, very few in economics. There was Ron Stanfield's book that had appeared roughly at the same time on the history of economics, of Karl Polanyi's economic thought. And of course, there was Margaret Summers and Fred Bloch and their very important article on the economistic fallacy that appeared in 1984. And while this was part of sociology, economic sociology, from my perspective, and I know this is a view that's shared, Fred and Peggy's 1984 piece really situated or resituated Polanyi in political economy, which is where he belongs. That's not in any way to diminish the importance of the work of economic sociology, but to take it broader. So that was the environment when we created the Institute. And shortly thereafter, it wasn't surprising that most of the participation came from those disciplines. We had many visitors and many former students of Karl Polanyi, George Dalton, Walter Neal. Harry Pearson did not visit, but we visited with him and spent many hours interviewing him about his collaboration with Polanyi, Anne Mayhew and Chapman and others. And so we had a privileged entry into Polanyi's Columbia years in particular. Oh, and I must not forget Abraham Rothstein. But if we then fast forward and look at when interest in Polanyi really grew exponentially, it really begins in 1989 and every decade since. And it really is a decade. There's really 10 years that separates what I would call surges in the interest of in the work of Polanyi. So 89, the collapse of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the end of the bipolar world, an enormous interest in the work of Polanyi, in particular, the Great Transformation. So moving towards more to the Great Transformation and less to the work in economic history and economic anthropology, which didn't diminish. That has remained stable. It's an important, he has contributed enormously to important debates in economic anthropology and in economic history. 10 years later, 1999, the protests in Wall Street that shut down the WTO, a massive, spontaneous counter movement. And perhaps here I'm reflecting my own interest, but it really demonstrated a new interest in the work of Polanyi pertaining to the role of civil society, of citizens' movements in opposing the neoliberal agenda. So that's 1999. Then if we go to 2009, 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, another major disruption, and again, a surge of interest in the work of Karl Polanyi. And I'm glad you mentioned, the falter for me epitomizes the importance of having Polanyi reach out to the academic world, of course, but also to the broader public. So cutting through this period, and of course we now have the pandemic, and again a surge, but cutting across all of these moments, of course, is the rise of authoritarian regimes and the populist right, and the environmental crisis. And so there's an interest as well by journalists, by filmmakers. David Cayley of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is our public broadcasting, did a 5-hour documentary on the life and work of Polanyi. It's still available, it's archived. Ilan Ziv, in his excellent 6-hour history of capitalism, devoted an entire episode, the last episode, to Karl Polanyi. It's excellent. And people like Thomas Piketty, Carrie Polanyi, of course, is in it. But Piketty is there, and I only mention that because it's the link to more present critical work in economics. There are journalists, including Larry Elliott, who had the economics desk at The Guardian, Will Hutton, who's at the London Observer, who wrote many articles referring to Polanyi. So I know time is short, so I won't just mention one thing, and that is that we have 2 projects, one which was really, and I put in quotes, primitive, where we hired a young student just to do a Google search from 1984 to 2000 to see how the references to Polanyi were growing or in what disciplines. And we see it rising steadily. But then Chris Millett, whose wonderful video is online, and I invite everybody to have a look if you haven't already, has done a much deeper search using sophisticated search engine to do a substantive search of influences that Polanyi has had across disciplines. From 1999 to 2020. And this is where you can really see the exponential rise, which I think coincides obviously with these cataclysmic, or I guess the pandemic really is the cataclysmic moment, but these were all major societal disruptions over several decades. This search that Chris is doing will be available. It's going to be a wonderful tool for researchers. And finally, the number of translations of the work of Karl Polanyi have also increased exponentially since the mid 1970s. I just received 2 weeks ago the most recent translation in Hebrew. And then the creation of the International Karl Polanyi Society in 2018. Prior to that, the creation of the Institute in Korea, Karl Polanyi Institute Asia, the Global Studies program in Budapest. So these networks have also sprung up in this time, and linking, and I join you in the importance of linking public intellectuals and the academic community, civil society movements, and really understanding the richness of the analysis of Karl Polanyi, not only to explain and help us understand the neoliberalism and its destructive capacities, but also to understand that that civil society has agency, and that collective action does have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Andreas, I would like to ask you to continue with the same topic. Both the book and the exhibition are basing on profound scientific work and Karl Polanyi, but address academic as well as non-academic audiences. What is the idea behind? Why do the International Karl Polanyi Society strives to reach out to science as well as publics by the book and the exhibition?
Yeah, thank you for this panel. Thank you for the opportunity of this discussion, and the very important question in the sense of that's really at the core of what the International Karl Polanyi Society is about. And I think that was also one of the key objectives in that Kari Polanyi-Leavitt had in mind when she pushed for creating such a society, which was finally set up in 2018. It's exactly, that's our key, let's say, objective, putting the economy in its place, as we write in our mission statement. And this is an undertaking that has an academic, scientific side to understand the ongoing transformations in this 21st century, and to grasp the dynamics, to identify entry points of taming, of overcoming capitalism, of tackling the climate crisis, the geopolitical challenges, all this. And I think the whole conference showed how rich Polanyian thinking is and how it contributes to these challenges. But there is a second side, and that's politics, that's the general public, the awareness of people of all these issues. And that's the second task of our society, public education, popular education, adult education, support for undergraduate courses. And as far as I see it, this book is something missing, let's say, on the market. This very accessible book on the history, the personal history of Karl Polanyi, of his family, his context, Budapest, where he was born, Red Vienna, the people he related to, the intellectual debates he was taking place with Mises, the relationship to Keynes, all these, his brother, Michael Polanyi, all these small chapters in this book, very accessible readings to get a good understanding in a very short time. And with the real substantial support of the Falter, in the sense of making this book accessible internationally at a very reasonable price, in a very nice format with very nice illustration, was really a privilege. And that's not a commercial undertaking by the Falter. It's really also somehow political contribution. And these are the advantages of globalization that we in this today would say provincial city of Vienna can make a contribution to the world understanding of Karl Polanyi exactly by offering a website where you can download the book, or buy it for 20 euros in a printed version. So that's I think this is the political logic behind, and the changes we undertook from the German version that was published in 2019 to the English version in 2020 is that we have a foreword by Mendell, and that we are happy that Peggy Summers, who is in the audience, together with Fred Block, made a proper contribution on the COVID crisis. I learned from her that this article is also very well received and read in the internet. So that's one contribution. We have a additional one by Robert Kuttner on the legacy of Red Vienna and implication for local socialism. We have an article by Kari written a year ago on Karl Polanyi and Ludwig von Mises' contested views on world development. That's an article that she wrote. That's a new article from her. So in this sense, it's an enriched version that made it more international and I would say also more interesting. Yeah, and that's and I think that's why I hope it finds an audience, and I hope it contributes to spreading the understanding of Karl Polanyi to a broad audience and filling a gap that translates Polanyi to a broad audience. When Marx argues, and we see how Polanyi is increasingly present in academic debates, bringing him to the broader audience as an intellectual from the 20th century besides Keynes, with certain advantages, with the advantage of grasping crisis dynamics probably better than Keynes, and for linking the ecological crisis with the social challenges. And that's why he has to be a key thinker of the 21st century. And the book makes it available, easily accessible for, let's say, ordinary people. And that has always been a key objective of Karl Polanyi as well. And in this sense, I think we are pursuing his heritage.
Thank you very much. And I would go to Claus. The next question. You have edited some works of Karl Polanyi, and you are very familiar with the history of his work. If we are looking from the contemporary development of economy and society on his works, what are the most important and inspiring thoughts and concepts, and what can we learn from his debates about economic thought and with economic thinkers for today?
A huge question that you asked me, because there are several concepts which really have become enormously important for the discussion in social theory, but also in the movements which are concerned with that. I simply want to recall the relationship between the economy and society, which is very well named embeddedness, and the question of how much embeddedness goes. We have the idea of the double movement, which indeed is an enormously rich category and which helps to understand a lot of what's going on in the 19th and in the 20th century, a category which is much broader than that what normally from economists is taken into consideration. And to name only a third one, think about the category of transformation. at least in the European, perhaps especially in the German context, transformation has become an enormously important category. If we think about what has to come, how to adapt to the ecological challenges. So we need some kind of social ecological transformation. Karl Polanyi has become the main figure of that discussion in order to promote all that train of thought. So if I want to look a little bit closer to that, I think there is another category which is already and may become even more important. That's the category of fictitious commodities. We have several contributions and a roll-up in the exhibition, contributions, chapters in the book. There is the chapter by Michele Canciani, who reflects about knowledge as a new fictitious commodity. We have another chapter by Marcus Wissen, who links that category of fictitious commodities with the ecological discussion, which we have. And indeed, the category has different dimensions, and that makes it so important. It has a moral dimension, for sure. It is the idea that in society, several goods exist which should not have the form of commodities. Human life should not be seen as a commodity. Nature should not be seen as a commodity. So that's one dimension, but there's another dimension which is at least as important as that. And I think indeed it shows that Polanyi is quite more radical in his thinking, because this dimension tells us that indeed we should not only think about what should be, but relate that to what is. And here Polanyi tries to show us that indeed, if we have a look, that the factors which the economists call the factors of production, they are not goods, or they are not commodities in a market sense. For a simple reason, Polanyi explains that they are not produced for sale. What does that mean? That means that indeed we have here commodities which the economic system cannot produce. The economic system or enterprises need to buy the fictitious commodities, but they are not able to produce them. So the economic system at that point of view is not closed. The economy depends on things which the economy itself cannot produce. The economy depends on the fact that the fictitious goods are provided by society. So the system is open to society. Or in other words, the fictitious commodities need or are based on social institutions which provide them. We have central banks, we have ecological legislations, all things which are provided by society. So in other words, that's an entry point of political power, of social power into the economic system. And therefore, these are points of social structure. So it opens the space to discuss that kind of questions much more profoundly than traditional economic theory or even social theory allows us to do. So that's only an example of what we are discussing in the book and also presenting in the explanation. But I simply want to show that here, indeed, we have things which I expect are not only interesting for scientists in the traditional sense of the term, but that are questions which are really open for a broader public. The book and the exhibition both are experiments in a certain way. But I'm very hopeful that the idea to connect both levels will be successful.
Thank you very much. Time is running. I regret that we have to be a little bit faster. And therefore, I would like to go first in the more specialized questions and then into the conversation. And invitation again to all of you in the audience to contribute in questions and answers. And we can include your comments and your questions. But first, I would like to give the word to Maria. And Maria, the conference discusses the role of the state concerning the COVID-19 pandemic. You are investigating Karl Polanyi's work with reference to his reflections on the state and democracy. What can the book and the exhibition tell us about how to make use of Karl Polanyi's work to better understand the contemporary development?
Thank you, Brigitte, for this question. Yes, although of course research was conducted on Polanyi already since the 1980s, as Margie has demonstrated, as we know, the 2008 financial crisis renewed interest for his work, and not only for of academics, but also of activists critical to neoliberal capitalism and its effects for labor, society, and democracy. And so the exhibition on Polanyi's work and life, organized by the International Karl Polanyi Society, and also the book edited by Brigitte and others, they try to enrich the research on his person and his work by covering a number of issues, from his background in Budapest and Vienna to affinities, differences between him, von Mises, Hayek, Keynes, to important issues as the commodification of care, effects of digitalization, the rise of the right wing, and various other issues. So if there is one common element in most of the book's chapter, and also a question we have tried to raise in the text of the brochure accompanying the exhibition, is how can politics be formed in a direction of a stronger democracy at the level of economy, society, and labor. Of course, the book edited by Brigitte and others could not have foreseen COVID-19, but the same questions are set again, and they are even becoming more urgent for the COVID and the post-COVID eras. And actually, yes, with regard to the question, the COVID pandemic has brought back once again the question of the state and democracy because of these recent large-scale state interventions, the unprecedented lockdowns, measures of policing, surveillance, biopolitical social control, millions of dollars and euros provided in the form of bailouts, state aid to temporary social benefits for some unemployed people, and of course, new laws for labor flexibilization and for capital incentives. Therefore, the title of the conference about the role of the state today is purposeful, and again, the very different tasks and actions of the state have to be analyzed, and especially under the specific pandemic conditions and the dangers put for democracies. For example, class and other inequalities pre-existed, but it seems the pandemic and the lockdown politics escalated them. For instance, the inequalities between blue-collar and white-collar workers, and those able to work from home and those obliged to leave the house, from factory and essential workers, couriers, supermarket workers, drivers, health workers, and so on, they were more exposed to the virus. Women were more overburdened during the lockdowns, as next to their online job, they had to take care of children or the elderly. Also, new school inequalities resulted from school closures, given that pupils and students from lower social strata have to rely more on the public school compared to the richer ones. And also, of course, those living in crowded homes or poor areas and the refugees in the camps across Europe are facing much higher risks of exposure to the virus, but instead of acknowledging their situation, they are even being demonized for spreading the virus. So both the financial crisis of the last decade and today's pandemic bring intensively to the fore the critique of Polanyi, both to market economies and to the liberal state. To Polanyian readers, state interventions as those of today are perhaps not surprising, as he emphasized how liberalism was never established spontaneously, but required an enormous increase in continuous, centrally organized and controlled interventionism, as he writes. And conversely, for Polanyi, the liberal state was itself a product of the market for the regulation of the commodification of land, labor, and money. And since social resistance was inevitable, the counter movement pressed for interventions at the fields of labor and social policy. Today, in the pandemic, we see again this seemingly contradictory character of the state, Polanyi illustrates, as the state takes some protective measures to bring back so-called normality, actually the normality of national neoliberalisms. So although during the last decades there was an effort to insulate economy from the dangers posed by democracy, we see again, as Polanyi has shown, and we tried to emphasize this in the texts accompanying the exhibition, that the economy is not some kind of a stateless zone, and that what he called economy-society separation is actually never realized in practice. Meanwhile, the lockdown conditions have put democracy at risk because labor protests and political rights are somehow suspended due to COVID laws. And that what we tried to stress in the text of the exhibition, and it was also shown in the Falter book, is Polanyi not only as a political economist and social historian, but also as a democracy theorist. Of course, he theorized democracy as the most powerful weapon of the working classes against market society, and he opposed some vulgar Marxist views according to which democracy was an epiphenomenon of capitalism. But he thought parliamentarism was not enough, and he advocated more direct forms of democracy, the workers' self-organization, the creation of solidarity collectives, and such social experiments, which have been for a long time aspired by social movements, are of course of special interest for the post-COVID era. Most importantly, of course, he envisioned the extension of democracy to the economy, so that democracy could cover all social fields, economy and labor. In the pre-COVID era, we were far away from such a project of democratization of the economy, so the question remains open: what happens after the huge COVID bailouts, and whether capitalism can be locked down without a new austerity round, and how to avoid actually the mistakes of 2008, 2010. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I would like to include the comments and the questions. The first one is Jerome Nikolai Warren. I found Andreas Novy's comment regarding the book very interesting. I have not read the book, but that was an excellent commercial for it. Particularly regarding Kari's contribution, comparing Mises and Polanyi, do we need more critical and holistic engagement with the history of social thought in uncovering what biases underlie modern paradigms? Also related, is there an Anglo-American bias in modern social theory? Can we learn by uncovering some of the European roots of this thinking, in particular neoliberal thinking? And the next comment I would like to include is from Peter Kirby. Very interesting conservation, thank you. I see that the climate crisis raises an important question for the double movement, since humanity now faces an ultimate threat, so that our future depends on putting an end to the double movement and moving to a new permanent condition, which Polanyi called socialism. I suggest that in this context, the importance of decommodification as the central contribution of Polanyi's thought to the political agenda of today needs more emphasis. Might the panel comment this? And a last question is whether the French translation is planned. It would be wonderful to have one, but we have no money for it. In case of funding, it would be possible. So the comments, I would give the word to Andreas and Margie, I think, to start and to include the comments in our question about the future. Who wants to start, Margie or Andreas?
I can start. And continue with the positive aspects of globalization. I think the very nice constellation is that we have the copyright of the exhibition, and the idea of the exhibition is a copy of an exhibition that is circulating in the German-speaking languages in Italy on Karl Marx. And the intention is doing something similar with Polanyi, and we have the German exhibition, and it can be translated in all other languages and used in all other parts of the world if you organize the translations. And a very similar thing, I assume, would be the case with the book, because we got the rights for the English translation for free from Falter Verlag, and I assume that would be the same with Spanish or French. So it's up to you, Michelle, to organize this. That was the first answer. The second answer, and I think that from the question from Jérôme, I think this is something that what I will say now that is very dear to Kari as well. I think one of the negative aspects of globalization is Anglo-Saxon focus. The idea that with globalization you even need to speak less languages because everybody speaks English, and therefore there is this illusion of a common culture, and Kari is very well aware of how she and how her father have been influenced by the Central European context they came from, and how the whole development economics in the 60s, 50s has been shaped by this, and how therefore the understanding of capitalism was different. It was a much more central role of the state in all these Central European forms of capitalism, a much more strong strands of anti-enlightenment thinking that made it the anti-liberal thinking that you see again with the return of reactionary right-wing politics in Eastern Europe, but also in Austria. And in this case, not only in Eastern and Central Europe, but it's definitively anti-liberal, also very often neoliberal as well. So it's a contradictory form of society and political movement, and I think you can grasp it with the help of Karl Polanyi. Yeah? You need Karl Polanyi and others, but he is a contribution to this. In this sense, yes, to your question, Jérôme, and to Peter, I'm working on social ecological transformation, and to be short now, I would say the key task is how can we organize the satisfaction of needs without commodities, and that's and the entry point is strengthening social ecological infrastructures, strengthening common provisioning wherever possible, and that's in the best tradition of social democracy with its focus on social infrastructures. less on mass consumption. Yeah, and that would be, in my understanding, the Polanyian way forward in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. And I would like to include a next comment, a question, and give the word to Margie.
Okay, thank you. Can I just reply? I'll be short because I'll just focus on Pedar's question and on decommodification. I happen to know, and perhaps others do as well, that Pedar Kirby, and he mentions it in his book, he lives in an eco-village, and so he is in a very special environment. These days we use the term bubble, and for COVID, but it's a big bubble. It's a community, and I think that it really is an example, a model of what you just raised, Andreas, of how to decommodify and live without dependence on material life. In my own work, I mean, decommodification has been critical to my work for the last 30 years. And some of you may know that I've been working in and on the social economy for many years, and really on processes of decommodification, working alongside actors to create financial institutions that are not market-based, that respond to collective needs and collective desires, working on creating land trusts, urban and rural, working on creating worker cooperatives. So these are all processes of decommodification of land, labor, and money, and more recently on platform cooperatives. Cooperativism's a way of decommodifying or de-Uberizing the digital world, and we have to add a fifth commodity, I think, in fiction today, and that is behavior. I mean, our behavior is being commodified, and we are unwittingly participating in this process. So I don't think that the social and solidarity economy is the answer to building a post-capitalist society, but it is certainly a very powerful one. It has great transformative capacity. And because many young people are drawn to this pre-COVID, but particularly now in the COVID environment, the sectors that are growing very rapidly, or the activities that are growing very rapidly, are in the commons, the circular economy, in food production, local food production, reducing the distance of supply chains. These are all very real examples, very real initiatives that are transforming what we think of as Polanyi's commodity fictions. And just to make the link with Walter book and all this work, we live in Quebec. Michel Baudin, I'm happy to see he's here. He's a Quebecer and an old friend of the Polanyi Institute. We have, I think, quite a unique society in that we have a very active labor movement, and the labor movement works very closely with other progressive movements, with the environmental movement particularly, and with the social and solidarity economy. So we're able to look at these issues from the perspective of organized labor that is also shifting because of deindustrialization and the rise of the digital economy. And we are able to take the Polanyi conversation always outside academia through a process of the social construction of knowledge, if you will. Students are involved. Many of our students, some of them go on and do PhDs and masters and PhDs. Many of them are working in the social economy now and designing circular economy initiatives, working in the food sector, drawing upon the theoretical roots that take them there. They are all steeped in Polanyi if they've worked with me. And I'll just end on saying that I think it was 2007 or perhaps 2008 when we had our conference, the international conference in Montreal. we invited representatives of the labor movement and of solidarity funds that were created by the labor movement. And leader of Nancy Nimtan, the leader of the social economy movement in Quebec, was our keynote speaker. So we have tried very hard to have this dialogue, an ongoing dialogue or a co-construction of knowledge with actors, and not limited to. It's very important to do the scientific work, and I don't diminish that, but it's not limited to the scientific work. These are realities. This is a reality of society that is occurring on the ground. And I think we have to make this more visible, because these initiatives are fragmented, whether it's an eco-village in Ireland or the social economy in Quebec. I mean, Eric Olin Wright included our work, or what we do in Quebec, as a real utopia in his last book. I'm not sure we are a utopia. We reach for utopia, but we have many contradictions and many challenges. But I think the processes of economic democratization, of moving towards economic democracy, citizen-based, the role of the labor movement, the role of academics working in partnership with activists, I think was what inspired Eric perhaps to exaggerate a little bit. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. There are still 9 minutes left, and we have a lot of questions. So the first goes to Claus, and combined with a short answer. The question of socialism did not answer until now, and you are an expert on freedom in a complex society. Maybe you can combine it in maximum 2 minutes, and then we have around to refer to each other and to point out some most interesting things from the book or the exhibition. So first, Claus, 2 minutes.
Oh, thank you. 2 minutes, I don't know how to do that. Nevertheless, yes, I think freedom is a central topic if you want really to understand Polanyi. I cannot go into the details here. For sure, you can pick up certain categories as the double movement, as fictitious commodities, which we find in the Great Transformation. They can be used very fruitfully. But if you want to understand Polanyi's reasoning from the ground, I think the most important question is the idea of freedom. How can we be free in spite of the reality of a complex society? That's a question which he asks in Budapest before the First World War. And he continues to ask that question during all his life. You can find very interesting short papers in the 1950s where he comes back exactly to that question. And his main problem is, if we have modernity, if we have the machine age, it brings us a lot of advantages. Polanyi does not look back to a past which was better than the present or the future. That's not true. But nevertheless, he was preoccupied that modernity brings increasing conformity, standardization of life, supremacy of mechanisms over spontaneity, and things like that. So he was preoccupied. How can we safeguard freedom, freedom understood for him as freedom combined with responsibility? And when we come to that, indeed, we are direct into the questions which we have to face today. Think about climate change. Who is responsible for climate change? How can I behave freely if I do not know what the contribution, what the responsibilities of me, of other people are? And the problem is that indeed a market society is not transparent. The market society does not show who is responsible for what. And with that, only in two sentences, I can come to what Brigitte asked, socialism. That's what he is thinking about socialism. Socialism is not a fixed structure of institutions. Socialism for him is the idea really to create a society where everybody has as much as possible understanding, overview of what's going on in society and can contribute to that. Because that's the only way that every person is able to take responsibility for the whole of society. So I think that's very close together. Freedom and socialism for Polanyi are questions which are directly linked to them.
Thank you very much. And we have 4 minutes left. What means 1 minute concluding remark for each? So who starts? 1 minute. Andreas, your minute is running.
Thank you so much. I leave my minute to Maria. I give my minute to Maria.
Okay.
Okay, Maria, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I just picked 2 points from the book, which I think are interesting and also correspond to the question about decommodification. In the chapter, Polanyi's prescience, COVID-19, Market utopianism and the reality of society, Margaret Somers and Bloch write about what they call the catastrophic weaknesses in the US healthcare system. And of course, we can be sure that the situation is much worse in poorer countries. The authors ask the question, how was this possible in the richest country in the world? And they suggest that exactly this is where Polanyi's critique becomes relevant. In a system of production and exchange organized exclusively by short-term market signaling, the needs of public health are systematically undermined. So I think this is a reality that became evident in many countries that privatized healthcare in the previous decades, and we have to think again in these COVID times. Also, Brigitte Aulenbacher in her chapter, Care Markets, from Careless to Caring Capitalism, she argues that capitalist society is a careless society, but new care markets are not the solution. She speaks of nursing homes that are forced to compete with one another for economic efficiency and describes a situation in which patients are seen as customers and can choose between care facilities. If they have the financial means, they get a different treatment if they are rich. And so now with COVID and the increased needs for healthcare and care in general, we saw the limits of this reality described by Brigitte. These were only two points out of the many points that can be made in reference to the book. And the question is how these neoliberal trends can be reversed in the direction of social justice and democracy. And of course, for this, we need more research and, of course, more social action and new counter movements.
Thank you very much. And Klaus and Marci, 1 minute for your concluding remark.
I will just, since there's only 1 minute, I would just congratulate the editors of this wonderful volume. As I wrote in the foreword, it brings together German-speaking authors with English-speaking authors who may not have had the opportunity to have that conversation before that. You asked us if we wanted to highlight a particular chapter. I would not. I think the book is really the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's a superb collection. It was a pleasure to read. But I will just highlight the title or the subtitle of the chapter by yourself, Brigitte, and Andreas and Veronica, Why Polanyi Ought to be Considered the Most Influential Personality of Our Century. I think that's a good place to end. So my congratulations to you. And I'm going to do everything I can to see if we can get that exhibition translated into English so that we can have it more widely disseminated. And final comment, which I didn't make at the beginning, and that is the digital Karl Polanyi archive. That was a huge endeavor, and it means that all of you who are on this and your students and colleagues have access, full access to all the writings of Polanyi, thanks to the work that was done to digitize the archive. But again, congratulations on the book and on the exhibition.
Thank you very much. 1 minute, Klaus.
So I don't want to talk about a specific chapter of the book. I think, as I said before, that it's an experiment really to bring together scientific work and more popular work. And we are trying to translate it from one audience to the other audience. I think, I hope that we were successful in that attempt. It should be, I hope so, the case that indeed we get a broad public for the publication and perhaps also for the audience, for the exhibition. If it is possible to make a translation of the exhibition to whatever language, it would be great. And perhaps we can also create some kind of collaboration with the archive, that at least in an electronic form, it can go also in the archive. So there would be a broader public which may have access to that. So we are still at the beginning with that, but I hope, and I think there are a lot of ways really to go ahead with that project that we started with. Thanks.
Thank you very much to all of you for this nice and informative discussion. And I hope that the book and the exhibition may be of interest for many people who are interested in the works and life of Karl Polanyi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brigitte. Thank you all.
Thanks, Brigitte, and all of you.
Thank you.
Very
See you at the next session.
Yes, see you.
Bye-bye.